So the recording has started now, and I would like to introduce you to Brenda and Roger Applegate. Brenda is the Executive Director of the Beaver County Historical Research and Landmarks Foundation. There, she initiated innovative programs such as Windows Through History, an award-winning program for young ladies, the Western Pennsylvania Quilt Documentation Program, and the Beaver County History Coalition. Ms. Applegate is also Vice President of the George Washington Trail Committee, the Western Pennsylvania representative for the Lewis and Clark Eastern Legacy Trail, and a member of the Beaver County Tourist Promotion Board. In her spare time, she is a reenactor demonstrating historical textile arts with Mrs. Applegate's School of Needlework. And she is married to Roger, who is also here with us today, and she's the mother of 2 sons, a cat and a dog. Roger has been retired for many years in retail management, but currently serves as the editor of Milestones, the quarterly magazine of Beaver County history. He is the author of 2 books documenting various aspects of county history. They're called Strolling Through Time, A Chronology of Beaver County, PA, History to 2016, and What Did That Sign Say? The Historical Markers of Beaver County, Pennsylvania. In his spare time, Mr. Applegate volunteers to help with operations at the Beaver County Historical Research and Landmarks Foundation. So welcome, Brenda and Roger, and I'll let you take over.
Thank you very much for having us. And I think what we will do is we'll go through our PowerPoint presentation, and if you have questions at the end, we will be very glad to try to answer those. So as we begin, I would like to say that we're all pretty much familiar with the present COVID-19 flu pandemic being compared to the Spanish flu outbreak in 1918. I thought we should explore what happened then, and then allow each of you listeners to draw your own comparisons between today and those fateful months in 1918. A little more than 100 years ago, as World War I was raging, the world faced one of the most devastating pandemics in modern history. Compared to the killing fields of World War I, which claimed nearly 18 million lives, this disease reaped a worldwide harvest of death estimated between 40 to 50 million people. Its death toll was second only to the bubonic plague of the Middle Ages, which claimed an estimated 200 million lives and ranks far above the present COVID-19 death toll. There are several theories as to where the pandemic originated. Some people thought it was the German attack in March 1918. Other people thought it began in Spain. The largest British Army hospital in Etaples, France in 1917. And there was a variant of an epidemic that had swept Europe several years before. But today, researchers believe that it actually started in a small town in Kansas and spread from there to nearby Camp Funston, which was an army training ground that was preparing troops to deploy overseas. If it began in America, why was it called the Spanish flu? Spain, being a neutral country during World War I, published more news of the virus in their newspapers. They were not censored as the countries at war were. Because of the increased news coverage, it was assumed that the virus started there. Excuse me. Whatever its origins, the Spanish flu occurred in 3 waves. The first appeared in the spring and summer of 1918. The second and most deadly wave arrived in the fall of 1918. And the third wave came in the winter and summer of 1919. As I mentioned before, the initial wave appeared at Camp Funston in Kansas. The first registered flu case was Albert Gitchell. He was a U.S. Army cook. Over 1,100 soldiers were affected, and 38 of them died of pneumonia. With World War I still dragging on, there was a great deal of troop movement back and forth, and the flu spread rapidly among the men on the crowded troop ships. By May and early June, the disease raced across Spain, France, England, Switzerland, and Germany. The flu proved to be fairly mild, but highly contagious. At first, the disease was shrugged off as the normal grip or influenza. Its symptoms included things like headache, high fever, cough, intestinal problems, and often only lasted a few days, but appeared without warning. It was reported that the flu attacked only the young, healthy, and males. Wave 1 lingered through early summer and seemed to have all but disappeared by late August. In late September, Wave 2 began. This time, the influenza had mutated into a deadlier form. It killed the very young, the very old, and especially people between the ages of 20 to 50. Ages 15 to 34 were 20 times more likely to die. 60 to 70% of all deaths attributed to the Spanish flu were about to occur between September and December 1918. This wave would be responsible for most of the deaths in the United States. The symptoms of the second wave included the high fever, bleeding from nose, mouth, and eyes, intense pain, paralysis, pneumonia, sudden and rapid death within hours or overnight, and it was highly contagious. Beaver County citizens began to hear the horror stories as the Spanish flu reignited in the East Coast cities like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. It was thought to have carried from Camp Devens, an Army training camp which was close to Boston. In some cases, people seemed to be perfectly healthy and caught the flu. They collapsed in the street and died within hours. There were also stories of whole families stricken at the same time who were unable to care for one another and eventually died within their homes. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and there was a severe shortage of doctors, nurses, and beds. As the deaths mounted, there was a shortage of undertakers, coffins, and grave diggers. The lack of grave diggers became so severe in some cases that county judges ordered anyone who was brought before the court, as well as current prisoners, to dig graves. In many cases, surviving family members were forced to bury their own. According to the Centers for Disease Control, was hit hard with the pandemic. More than 500 corpses awaited burial, some for more than a week. Cold storage plants were used as temporary morgues, and a manufacturer of trolley cars donated 200 packing crates for use as coffins. Wagons were pulled through the streets to collect the corpses. Funerals were often impossible to organize, and across the country, graves were dug to accommodate the many dead. Bodies piled up, and no one had anticipated anything like this. During the calm before the second influenza storm hit this area, life in Beaver County went on as normal. Our citizens saw a second draft take another round of men for war. Liberty Bond drives raised large amounts of money. County women stepped forward to fill men's jobs. In early June, the German-owned Ornstein-Koppel Company and the town of Koppel were seized by the federal government for sending embargoed steel to Germany. Our county mills were producing glass, bombs, and steel for ships. Citizens were planting backyard gardens to alleviate food shortages, and daylight savings time was introduced in the United States by part-time Beaver County resident Robert Garland. Beaver County held its breath on October 4th as the first reported infection occurred in West Bridgewater and Ambridge. 6 members of the Louise Vogel family fell ill in Bridgewater. From there, it spread like wildfire through the rest of the northern part of the county, mostly around the steel mills and other manufacturing plants with dense populations of immigrant workers. By the end of the day, the Ambridge Citizen was reporting that 364 people were sick with the flu, and the Board of Health shut the town down. The American Bridge Company was closed, and all of its buildings were disinfected. Since there were no real medicines to cure the flu, nursing usually included putting the patient to bed, giving aspirin for the fever, applying hot mustard foot baths, making hot lemonade, serving nutritious food, applying Vicks Vapor Rub to help breathing, and changing their bed and their clothing. There were also a lot of swindlers at work who promised guaranteed cures and preventatives. Laxative bromoquinine tablets promised to remove the cause of influenza by keeping the system in condition to throw off the attacks of the influenza. Then there was anti-flu, a preventative that was sprayed in the throat or gargled. Peruna supposedly warded off the flu if taken regularly. Bulgarian blood tea was supposed to relieve flu symptoms, and one company also offered the dubious Dr. Pierce's Pleasant Pellets or Dr. Pierce's Golden Medical Discovery. Of course, none of them had much, if any, medical value. On October 5th, the Pennsylvania State Health Department ordered the closure of all clubs, lodges, and public meetings of every description, whether in open air or in halls or theaters. Groups of people congregating on the streets were strictly forbidden. In addition, visitors were not allowed at funerals, no weddings could be held, and hospital visits were forbidden. In the town of Ambridge, any violation of the closure order was met with a $50 fine. According to a Pittsburgh Press article, by Monday, October 7th, another 200 cases of flu were reported in Ambridge, along with 4 deaths. Woodlawn, which is now Aliquippa, had several cases, and Freedom had 12. By October 14th, hoping to stop the spread of the virus, several doctors visited the local schools and found a number of infected children. As a result, Rochester, Beaver, Beaver Falls, Freedom, and New Brighton followed College Hill, Bridgewater, and Monaca in closing their schools. All Valley churches were ordered closed also. The same day at Providence Hospital in Beaver Falls, the entire Hoffman family from Midland died from the disease. On October 15th, doctors reported that there were 1,500 cases of flu in Ambridge. The Elks Temple, which is now the American Legion building, was converted into an emergency hospital with cots, pillows, and mattresses donated by the American Bridge Company. Within 2 days, court proceedings had been postponed until November. Meanwhile, the Red Cross was busy setting up emergency hospitals to handle the overflow from our local hospitals. In addition, each city branch of the Red Cross was asked to establish a community kitchen to cook and deliver food to the many infected households where families couldn't take care of themselves. On October 18th, Midland reported 57 more cases and 5 deaths. The flu was particularly bad in industrial areas that had large numbers of workers. Prior to the flu, there was a housing shortage for single men, which boarding houses solved in an interesting way. Since the men worked shifts, a bed was rented out to 2 men. One was able to sleep while the other was working. They would switch places when the first man's shift ended, causing problems when the sickness hit. The Red Cross was feverishly setting up emergency hospitals in the Midland Borough building. Elwood City was juggling 114 cases, with 57 victims being treated in their emergency facility in the Polish Alliance Club. In the spirit of community, volunteer nurses from nearby Newcastle had arrived to help a group of local teachers aiding the sick. Shelby Tube Mill was building a hospital on their grounds to help handle another 20 cases. At the height of the pandemic, overworked hospitals could only accept severe cases, people from boarding homes that had no one to take care of them, or families of 6 or more that were stricken with the flu. October 28th, newspapers reported that the flu was responsible for over 150 deaths in the county from the prior week. By this date, most of the county towns had emergency hospitals set up to handle the increasing number of infections, but that didn't include the numbers that were nursing people at home. Since nurses were heavily engaged in the hospitals, nursing in the private homes fell to the persons or persons well enough to handle the task. Overwhelmed doctors made house calls the best that they could. At times, pleas were made for strangers to come in and help nurse the sick or take the patient and their families into their own homes to care for. And many people did do that for others. Within a day, newspaper reports claimed the flu was raging more fiercely at this time than any other time that the epidemic hit the valley. To stop the spread, the public was instructed to avoid all crowds, wear a mask when out in public, cover faces when sneezing or coughing, avoid public conveyances like streetcars and trains, and just try to stay home. All stores were closed except for the drugstores, and those were only allowed to sell drugs. In spite of all the closures, it was a top priority, though, to keep the steel mills and related industries working to support the ongoing war effort. As October 30th dawned, the death rate seemed to have waned and thought it was given to lifting the bans. Deaths had declined from over 200 the prior week to 60 that weekend, and from 20 the prior day to just 10. Geneva College reopened because College Hill had relatively few cases of the flu than the more affected parts of the country. It's likely that it had to do with its enrollment in the war service and its work in training its Student Army Reserve Corps for war in Europe. By the end of the day, on October 31st, local health authorities believed that the worst was over when no deaths had been reported overnight and fewer than a dozen new cases were reported throughout the county. Overall, the death rate had decreased over 30%, and new flu cases dropped over 25%. Halloween was not celebrated that year. Anyone caught celebrating was given 24 hours in jail or a fine. On November 9th, all bans were lifted except in Ambridge and West Bridgewater, which were the first and the hardest hit Beaver County communities. It would be 4 more days until their ban was removed, signaling a return to normal. Remnants of the flu remained almost until Christmas, and then slowly faded away. A November edition of the Ambridge Citizen gave a final death toll of 144 of its citizens. The last recorded death of the Spanish flu was on December 26, 1918. The county schools reopened in January, and people prayed that it was finally over. A large part of the credit for the decline in deaths was the fact that an anti-flu serum was being distributed in the county that scientists felt would help prevent the flu. It was created from a bacteria taken from the mucus secretions of flu patients. Unfortunately, it was based on the idea of inoculations using dead bacteria strains when they were dealing with a live virus instead. Viruses were not identified until the early 1930s. Yet it must have had some effect on the underlying issues caused by the flu virus, like preventing pneumonia, which was one of the killing side effects of the flu. Whatever the case, the large steel companies, railroads, and Bell Telephone purchased and inoculated their own workers with the new serum. Wave 3 hit in the spring of 1919, but it was a much milder form of the flu with lower death rates. By that summer, Wave 3 had disappeared for good. As the flu faded from view, its effect remained. It's estimated that 40 to 50 million people had died worldwide. The United States suffered nearly 675,000 deaths. Pennsylvania had over 60,000 deaths. The total number of infections and deaths in Beaver County are unknown, but we can safely guess that they numbered in the many hundreds. And you can see the comparisons of our current COVID deaths compared to what the Spanish flu deaths were. The toll of human suffering and the economic impact from a worldwide pandemic inscribed this disease forever in our history. And perhaps one newspaper reporter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette said it best. Our greatest danger now is the great American tendency to forget easily and to believe the peril is over. So I want to share some interesting facts that you might enjoy. The American Samoa was the only place in the world to escape its embrace. There, not a single person either contracted the flu or died from it. The governor had imposed a quarantine cutting off all contact with the outside world. However, the nearby island of Samoa, controlled by New Zealand, was devastated and nearly 1/5 of its inhabitants. Notable people who died from the Spanish flu. John and Horace Dodge. They were the inventors and manufacturers of the Dodge automobile. Francisco and Jacinta Marto. These were two of the Portuguese children who witnessed the miracle at Fatima when they sighted the Virgin Mary. Donald Trump's grandfather, Frederick Trump, died from the Spanish flu. We did have some people who recovered from the flu. Walt Disney contracted the virus when he was a member of the Red Cross Ambulance Corps at the end of World War I. President Woodrow Wilson contracted the disease while attending the Paris Peace Treaty negotiations in April of 1919. Franklin D. Roosevelt caught the infection while being the Secretary of Navy following a trip to Europe. And General John Pershing, who was the Supreme Commander of the American Expeditionary Force in Europe, when he caught the virus. Other notable people would be Mary Pickford, and she was a famous silent film actress. Clementine Churchill, he was the wife of future British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Babe Ruth, who actually contracted the flu twice. Once was during the first wave in the spring of 1918, and again during the second wave in the fall of 1919 after winning the World Series with Boston. Groucho Marx contracted it in New York City. And Amelia Earhart, and she was a Red Cross nurse cooking meals for returning soldiers when she contracted the flu. So, are there any questions?
So if anyone who's attending has any questions, you can turn on your microphone if you feel comfortable doing so, or if you'd like, you can chat, you can type your questions in the chat and I'll relay them to our presenters. So are there any questions? While they're thinking about questions, I actually have a question. Do you happen to know how long it took for our area to rebound from the Spanish flu? I'm not talking about the virus itself, but economically, because it sounds like it's pretty similar to what's going on right now with COVID. Economically, did it take a while to rebound? Go ahead.
Well, it might have taken a short time, but they were very, very conscious of keeping the war industries up and running. So I don't know that other than maybe losing some manpower that it was an issue. And I'm sure they had a lot of other immigrants and things to replace those ones that they lost.
How long in total? I was trying to keep track, but I didn't do a good job. How long in total were they shut down? Because they, some of these towns shut down. Was it just a couple of months, or was it as lengthy as our shutdown?
No, most of them only lasted a few weeks. The killer part was only about a month.
Very
So it was
interesting.
a very short time in there. And of course, like I said, they were very, very, very conscious of making sure the war industries continue.
How about everyone who's attending? What sort of correlations did you see in the presentation that Brenda and Roger were so that they were willing to give us today? What sort of correlations did you see between the information? Oh, okay. Monique just asked a question. I don't know if you saw it. So Monique asked, why wasn't this talked about more? I have only started learning about this once COVID started. I am from Midland, but I've never heard of the Spanish flu reaching Midland.
Well, I think the Post-Gazette writer said it the best. Our greatest danger now is that great American tendency is to forget easily and to believe that the peril is over. I really think he sums it up. We tend to forget our history. History in general, we tend to forget about it.
It's been a long time since I've taken an elementary school or a high school history course. Is the Spanish flu even discussed in history courses on the elementary and high school level?
I can't answer that, but I know a big part of our regional history is the French and Indian War, and that's not even discussed in our local history books anymore. So it's our history is being written, say, in Texas. Our books are being published in Texas, and we're not as tuned into what has happened locally like maybe 50, 60 years ago. And I don't know how many American history courses there are because now it's combined into civics. So,
And also, when you have something that was as terrible as that 1918 pandemic, people tend to want to forget that. It's not something they want to remember and talk about.
It makes
I guess another question to ask for your students, if you have a veteran that served in World War II or Korea or Vietnam, how many of them talk about their reaction to the battles and their service? Do they talk about when they return home?
I think to that I would probably answer no. I don't think it's. I know that my grandfather never spoke about it.
Mhm.
It's just not something that they talked about, which may be why that they don't necessarily discuss the Spanish flu. I think Dennis had a question. Dennis, did you want to turn on your mic?
I was just going to relay the fact that since I am a high school student, that we do not talk about the Spanish flu, or at least I don't remember it all. It's never really been mentioned or brought up because it's more focused on the military and the background of the difference of how basically the U.S. came to be, and not more of the hardships, but more of the battles that had to be fought for us to colonize, basically.
Even now with COVID, Dennis, you're still not talking about it in schools. I mean, the correlations between the similarities between the two are astounding. I'm surprised that it's not being discussed.
Yeah, it's a little odd, especially with the whole COVID thing. And I actually finally realized after reading the book that you have assigned to us, um, that now I see why you picked that certain book for us to read, as it does deal with the Spanish flu. Um, but yes, it is definitely astonishing how it's not more discussed because of the whole COVID situation.
She wanted to know, how did the government take care of the people? They really didn't. It was more that the question that was posted, the government wasn't as involved with taking care of the people as much as they are today. It was more families
In
and
Red Cross.
the Red Cross and the communities.
I don't think the welfare system existed, did it?
No, no.
It was 1930s.
That was 1930s, the welfare system.
And unemployment came out at that same time, correct? Or somewhere around that time frame,
No.
or was that before?
Actually, I think the welfare system was in the 60s.
Okay. Unemployment though was maybe 30s.
I think that was much later.
Are there any other questions for our presenters? Yeah, Monique, why is it scary, Monique? I mean, I agree with you, it is scary, but what makes it scary for you?
It's just like there's another, back in 1918, like I'm reading the book that you assigned to us, and it's just how similar like the symptoms are and how many deaths it caused. It's like history repeating itself, and it's just mind-boggling to me.
Roger had done some research, and he said that the direct descendants of the 1918 flu were combined with the bird flu or the swine flu, and that created a new pandemic strain. And that happened in 1957, 1968, and 2009. And in some ways, all of these flu outbreaks were created in part by the 1918 virus.
Is
So,
COVID
and
is
some,
COVID
they're all COVID related.
Not exactly.
Well, the H1N1 strain.
Yeah, that was those three. COVID is actually a COVID strain. It's related to SARS, which was an outbreak in 2003. So it's still with us today. It's part of the regular flu vaccines and things that we get. So it never really honestly went away.
So a question, not just to the presenters, but to everyone who's attending as well. If we forgot, so to speak, the 1918 epidemic of Spanish flu, do you think we're going to forget COVID?
It's kind of funny because my mother was a young child during the Spanish flu, and she does not remember her mother speaking of it either. So it probably, once we move onward, I think we'll all forget about it to a certain extent.
Or at least once our generation is gone.
That's interesting. Do you see the chat, Brenda and Roger?
Yeah, we do.
I mean, it'll be interesting to sort of. I mean, we are very much watching history unfold, and it'll be interesting to see what happens within the next 10 years or so. So, are there any other questions for Brenda and Roger?
I have a question. What was the name of the book you asked the kids to read?
Last Town on Earth by Thomas.
Oh, that's right. I did read it.
Yeah, it's part of our part of our common read program. There are several schools in Western Pennsylvania that are. Sarah, what were the schools that are reading this particular book? I forget definitely us, but who else is reading this?
It is CCBC, Penn State Beaver, Robert Morris, Geneva, and PA Cyber.
So there's several schools that are reading this book right now. Half of Western Pennsylvania is what I tell my students. So I think that more people probably know about the 1918 epidemic than ever before, which is really it's good that we're learning about this now, even if we didn't learn about it before. At least we're learning about it now, and hopefully history won't repeat itself later on. So I thank you so much, Brenda and Roger. This has been a fantastic presentation, incredibly informational. I mean, this is, and as I mentioned previously, many students are going to watch this recording later, and so it'll have a long-lasting effect on our students. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Can I make one suggestion?
Sure, absolutely.
In our history groups, it was suggested to us by the Pennsylvania State Museum Commission that we all record our feelings of when COVID started. Some of the questions you might want to answer are, how do you feel about being told what to do? You know, wearing a mask, getting a vaccine. What were your feelings when the epidemic started? And then what are your feelings now? And then bring it up to date, so that when we are through all of this, how did you react to it? The book that you read, I mean, I think I would have been really upset if somebody told me I couldn't leave town. You know, but we did that in Ambridge. We shut the town down. So it really, even it's history repeating itself.
I love what you're proposing too, the idea that we sort of document our history as we're experiencing it, and document how we're feeling about our history as we're experiencing it. Sarah, I feel like we need to do something campus-wide with this. This might be interesting.
Yeah, because one of the problems.
Yeah, I agree. And we talked about it with Dr. Marshall doing something, but we kind of never did anything with it. We can talk about it.
Okay, we'll talk
The,
about it.
the problem we had with doing this presentation was that there were no newspaper articles. Mostly the pictures and things that we saw were from Pittsburgh. But trying to get documentation from Beaver County was really kind of
Yeah, it's
difficult.
not in the histories. Nobody really
Yeah.
wrote about it.
And if you do decide to do this, we would be very glad to store those opinions or writing documents in our archives at the Vickery Mansion,
I think
so
that would
that
be,
whoever comes to do research 50 years from now would have some what our young people have felt going through this pandemic.
I think that we can probably definitely do something like that. Let Sarah and I spend some time with this and try to get it going. And then I think what we'll do is we'll reach out to you, and we'll reach out to you soon, because I really think this would be, I think this would be a good thing for us to do. I think it would be awesome. So let us try to work through the logistics of it, and we will certainly touch base with you again and try to figure out something.
I will find the form that they sent us, and that might give you some guidelines.
Okay, that sounds great. That sounds great. Thank you so much for that suggestion, and thank you for this presentation today as well.
You're welcome.
And thank you everyone for joining us today. Remember that if you're interested, you will have access to this presentation later. As I mentioned in class, it does count as a scholarly source. So you are more than welcome to use it for whatever research you're doing throughout your college career. So thank you again, Brenda and Roger. This was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for having us. How do we leave?